Over on our Discord, a topic was brought up regarding the use or the design of esoteric or unique game mechanics, and what it means to design a game system for when you're trying to tell an unusual story or put the player in an unusual position. And that's going to be our topic for today's Critical Thought. As we've said many times before when discussing mechanics, they are, of course, the verbs of a game. Running, jumping, shooting, playing cards, running civilizations, flying spaceships, etc., etc. And many games make use of generalized or streamlined mechanics that allow for certain affordances or elements to carry over. If you played one platformer, you know how to jump in another platformer. If you know how to shoot a gun, you can shoot a gun a first, a third person shoot, any other shooters that you wish. But there's also a greater discussion we had about very unique or esoteric mechanics. This is when you want the mechanics to kind of be more integrated into the story or experience, and the generalized control scheme or the generalized design wouldn't necessarily work, or we kind of take the player out of it. This is kind of where we get into that somewhat of a sense of dissonance, as we've said before, a Ludo narrative, where the player is having to be, let's say, let's say they are a very quiet, they're a frail character, but you still build them around a third-person combat system that allows them to run and jump and attack like Dante from Devil May Cry. And this is something that we've seen, I think, a lot more from the independent and smaller developer space than we do from AAA, because these kinds of mechanics generally fit a smaller design. Now, the footage you're seeing right there is from Brothers, A Tale of Two Sons, and this was a game that was built around this whole hook that you're controlling two separate characters at the same time, both brothers. One brother using the left analog stick, the other one using the right. And all of the mechanics and all the ways you interact are filtered through this idea of controlling both of them. So that if you're trying to climb up a mountain and they're basically tied together by a rope, you have to send one brother up and then the other brother to kind of follow along. And there are other examples of this. There are games where instead of you just driving a vehicle around, you have to, let's say, interact with each individual aspect. There is this game that I cannot remember off the top of my head where you did just that. You had to control this giant vehicle that was going from, cross country over the post-apocalypse. And this kind of design really starts to get into that discussion of how much should the mechanics afford or be involved in the narrative. As I said a minute ago, when we talk about the idea of low narrative dissonance, that's when there is a clash, such as, I am a badass soldier who can kill all manner of monsters and demons, but I can't jump over a chest-high wall. Or the chest-high wall provides magical cover that prevents anyone from shooting me in the head, even though my head is completely exposed or somebody attacks me from behind. And when we start to see games that fit their mechanics more into the storytelling, it does open things up for more unique game designs. There was another game that I played that we never did stream, but you would run a space station, and it was your job to interact with each one of these systems using a completely different UI and mechanics in order to keep the space station afloat and not get destroyed by any means. We could even talk about such games like the Five Nights at Freddy's franchise that kind of popularized this idea of very static, almost like a tower defense horror game, where you have to pay attention and, of course, keep your focus on various points. Now again, people have said, I know I've said that maybe we could have seen Five Nights at Freddy's with more of an action-oriented focus, letting the player move around and do more interactions. But that would, in essence, betray that design. And this is kind of the point of this discussion when we talk about this kind of esoteric systems, that you are trying to fit the mechanics to the narrative almost as one-to-one as you can make it. And that doesn't work when you use generalized systems. Now, with that said, there are some obvious downsides to this kind of design that we'll get to in a few minutes. But to keep with the positives, when this works, we generally see this in more artistically focused games. Again, Brothers over there won a lot of awards and got a lot of credit for it being such a different kind of gameplay. And developers, I think, went on to do that Prisoners game that I think came out for PlayStation 4. And I don't know how well that game, how well the response was for it. And for independent games, this is kind of a major way to make your game stand out. One of the big examples, of course, would be the Cook Serve Delicious franchise. That is built on a very esoteric system. Now, with that said, though, that kind of falls into almost like a middle ground. Because, yes, you are doing something differently, but it's still not fully related to the fact that you are cooking. Again, we don't cook by memorizing key presses on a keyboard. Although, maybe that will happen in the future, who knows. And when you go this route, like we've said, it affords you a lot more freedom in designing your game, as long as you can convey that to the people playing it. If you show me footage of a third-person shooter or platforming, and then I play your game and it's anything but, that can be seen as a betrayal. And in a way, unique game mechanics like this are both easier and harder to market. Again, if you're watching the footage of Brothers there, you can see that we are doing general gameplay. But there is literally no way for somebody watching that footage to know what that core gameplay loop is. And it's an issue that we see a lot with kind of 4X or very abstract designs when it comes to marketing. And that is definitely a topic for another day. So, while this can certainly lead to high accolades, it can also lead to kind of frustration when it comes to the actual gameplay. And after this quick break, we're going to switch to some different footage and talk more about that. And now for a quick shout out to our current Game Wisdom supporters and sponsors. Going forward, all Patreon supporters will get early access to our videos. And if you'd like to continue this discussion on game design, be sure to check out our Discord channel, linked down below. If you're looking for more wisdom about game design, be sure to check out my latest offering of books, 20 Essential Games to Study, aimed for first-time developers and students looking for some inspiration for their upcoming games, and Game Design Deep Dive Platformers if you're interested in anything regarding 2D and 3D platforming design. They're both available in print, digital, and wherever books are being sold. As we said at the end of the last part, that when you have esoteric game mechanics, they are usually best tied to when you're trying to tell a unique story or put the player in a different or unusual position. But it does present some downsides when it comes to the overall playability. Because whenever you have something that is different or not easily explained or easily referenced, it means that you are kind of hurting or limiting the mechanics of it. Like we've said, there's a reason why many developers focus on action-related games, and we'll be doing another video probably on the topic of whether or not violence is still as marketable as it was 10 to 15 years ago. But the reason why these generalized systems work so well is that, again, a lot of the onboarding and general playability and marketing is done for you. If you're building a platformer, you know that you're going to have platformer fans hopefully playing it. First-person shooter, real-time strategy games, so on and so forth. But when you have something such as with the Return of the Obra Dinn here, where this is a narrative, murder, mystery, walking simulator, I guess book simulator as well, it's a lot harder to know what that market is. Likewise, it's a lot harder to know how the mechanics work or whether or not people are going to take to it. With the Return of the Obra Dinn here, your main thing is essentially trying to parse out who everybody is aboard the ship by watching the various scenes. And the game does a reasonably good job of teaching that to the player, but it's still obviously not as fine-tuned or not as, I guess, easy to onboard the player compared again to some of the more mainstream designs. Of course, there are some games that make use of these systems that it tends to kind of become almost a smokescreen for the design present, such as Getting Over with Bennett Foddy, where in that game it was purposely designed to be very unique and very frustrating to play in order to kind of tell a point or make a point about design in general. And like you said, there have been plenty of games that force the player to make use of very extraneous actions or doing something different in order to make the game feel like it's doing something unique or profound. Such as, here's another example. Many games or many independent games that require you to manually open up doors. Or it's not just you pressing a button to pull a lever or flip a switch, you have to manually do it, or manually set things up. And some developers and some consumers will say that's making things more immersive for the player. But it always comes at the expense of the actual playability. And one of the things about games that go along with these kinds of designs is that whenever you are kind of putting gameplay, second, third, fourth down the list, it's always going to make that gameplay feel lesser than the sum of its parts. Now, for those of you watching this right now, I'm curious what you thought of Return of the Obra Dinn. This is probably one of the most praised examples of unique designs that kind of fit both the narrative and the gameplay. Although I honestly don't know anyone who managed to completely solve the mystery, and I got stuck about, I think, a quarter to halfway through myself when I played it. And again, when you are building something entirely unique and original, it also means you don't have a framework to go by. And this is the other issue that we run into with these games. It's kind of difficult to get play testers and test your game when you have nothing to reference it from. And I would love to have the developer, I think Lucas Pope, of Return of the Obra Dinn on for a cast to talk about kind of balancing and designing this game in terms of those lines. Because it's very hard sometimes to know just what it is people are going to like or dislike about your title, when again you don't have those usual connotations to go by. And like we said, for many developers, especially on the smaller scale, this can be your way in a manner of speaking, for notoriety and marketing your title. That even if your gameplay isn't the best, if you manage to do something different or unique at the right time, it can certainly propel your game, especially, as we all know, if it attracts big-time YouTubers to play it, as we saw with Five Nights at Freddy's. And it has unfortunately led to kind of this, I think, snubbing by some people of these kinds of designs. That you are purposely designing something to be weird and hard to play in order to, again, just have weirdness for the sake of weird. And that is another topic in of itself to talk about. And how some developers will kind of purposely forego general gameplay practices and playability if it means just making a weird game and hoping that the weirdness will sell it on its own. And for our final point for this video, it's important to bring up that regardless if you're working with traditional or different mechanics, that does not excuse playability. And this is a trap that we see a lot of developers fall into on both sides or both ends of the spectrum. That just because I design the umpteenth platform or a first-person shooter, that I don't need to worry about UI and UX design. No, you still have to have those elements in place. And if you are doing something unique here, like with the Obra Dinn, Getting Over It, Five Nights at Freddy's, then you have to pay even more attention to how you onboard those players. Because remember, if you are onboarding, or if you're doing something unique and different, you do not have the luxury of affordances and other games that kind of do that teaching for you. With Obra Dinn here or Papers, Please, there are no other games like this. So you have to make sure that the player knows what's going on and knows how to grow, or they're going to take one look at your game, get frustrated, and never play it again. For those of you watching this right now, can you think of other examples of very esoteric or unique game systems that either worked really well or clashed, whether it came to the onboarding or the narrative? Let me know in the comments below. Be sure to check out our Discord and Patreon link down below and come back for daily discussions on game design here and on game wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games. Until next time, take care. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed things, be sure to do all the liking and subscribing that the kids are doing these days. Check out our Discord channel link down below where we hang out and chat game design, and come back later tonight for our regular streamings. But that's it, and tune in for more great content here and on Game Wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games.